If you've just joined and you haven't had a chance to take the Quiet Revolution quiz, I did put it in the chat. I think, though, if you just joined, you won't be able to see it. So let me post it again. There we go. Take a minute to take that while we get ready to start. And we're going to start in 1 minute. All right, I promised we'd start at 9:05, and I think we're going to go ahead and start. I'm sure some people will be joining as we go, so don't mind us if we're leaning forward, letting people in from the waiting room. My name is Shannon Beats. I know some of you from the leadership workshop, where I've been the facilitator for the last 8 or 9 years, I think, and this is Dr. Christina Frederick. We're going to go ahead and introduce our backgrounds as part of the presentation, but I just want to start by thanking the North Lake Tahoe-Truckee Leadership Program for sponsoring this event. Many of you I know are part of the North Lake Tahoe-Truckee Leadership Program, which is a leadership program for adults that offers leadership training and encourages community engagement for people in the North Lake Tahoe-Truckee area. If you're new to the leadership program and you just found this workshop some other way, I really encourage you to check them out at www.northlaketahoe-truckee-leadership.com, and I'll put their web address in the chat box. And although they're not currently offering their spring leadership program because of the pandemic, which is so hard after doing that for 10 years, but this year I think they correctly made the choice to wait. They will be admitting a 2022 class. So if you're interested in taking the program, go over there and apply. And because they didn't offer the formal workshop this year, they were able to sponsor these workshops for anybody that wanted them instead. So it's nice to see alums and different folks in here taking advantage of these free workshops. So with that said, I think I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you guys can see our PowerPoint, and we'll get started. And again, both of us are professors, so we're used to taking questions. If you have questions as we're going along, feel free to unmute and ask us or put them in the chat box. Oh, and I should mention, because she just did posted the link for me, that our resident extrovert, Karen Wilcuts, is here. You all know Karen from running the program. She had a little bit of a surgery on her clavicle, so instead of not being here at all, which is where I would be, she's here, but she has her screen blacked out. But we're still really, really happy to have her listening.
Go
ahead.
Gates case gets more bizarre as extortion plays all search.
All right, so I'm going to share, and here we go.
It doesn't exist on here. I think that's right here.
There we go. All right, can you guys see that slide? Give me some thumbs up if you can see it. Okay, awesome. So here we go. This is my background. I'm not going to read it to you, but I am going to tell you that I consider myself an introvert. I'm right on the line between introvert and extrovert. If you look at my Myers-Briggs results at the end there, I'm an INTJ, but I've always had very extroverted jobs. So I've been in higher education for 25 years, most recently as a provost and executive vice president. And a lot of that requires me to play the role of an extrovert in my daily life. And so this is going to be really exciting to talk to you about introversion and extroversion today.
And that would be me. So I'm Christina Frederick. I came out on that survey that you guys just took, I think pretty cleanly as an ambivert. When I read the text, which I'm not sure if you guys had a chance to take a look at or not for this seminar, they have some surveys throughout. And as you're reading the questions, I'm pretty cleanly, well, about half and half. And so I think that I'm a clean A. Anyway, I came out as noted here, the ISTJ. T, I'm actually not sure what the little T means, but it said that it was a particular group because the logistician is the most common designation. So I guess they have like subcategories of that, but I need to go learn more about what that means. So I have a PhD in cognitive psychology from the University of California, Berkeley. And I have been teaching for, I guess it's around 20 years now, which makes me feel a little on the old side. Separate from the fact that it's also my birth month. I taught for 10 years with Shannon. So that's something that we do have in common. And I agree with what Shannon said. Please do just jump in and ask questions, because that also kind of makes us feel like hey, you guys are out there via Zoom, because things can be a little weird.
So later on in the presentation, we're going to ask you to edit your names to show us whether you're an introvert or extrovert. If you know how to do that and you want to do it anytime, go ahead. When we get to that slide, I'll go ahead and walk people through that. So I am going to go on to the content. You know that we have a couple of sources from this presentation. You can read about those later. I highly recommend both these books and both the authors for information. They both have extensive websites with lots of videos. And Susan Cain specifically has an incredible TED Talk that you can check out. Quite a well-received TED Talk out there. All right. So we're going to start on this big slide because this is the takeaway that we want you to have from this presentation. And normally you save that for the end, but I think this is an important one to throw out there from the beginning, which is that you are entitled to be you. Introvert, extrovert, ambivert. You are entitled to live in a way that makes you comfortable. And we think that the big win is figuring out how to achieve your core goals while being yourself. And so we're going to talk to you today about introvert and extrovert strategies for achieving that big win. You want to add to that?
Well, I do agree. And I think that it is the challenge to identify really like, where am I? We're so used to just playing the role, right? So where am I comfortable and where am I less comfortable, so that you can navigate into those uncomfortable areas and shift them out, right? So we'll spend more time like giving you the ideas to think about for later during the session, and then you can, reflect back. I know that I've spent now about a month prepping for this, and it's pushed me to think about things that maybe I didn't really want to think about before, where I am uncomfortable, when, and with who, right? And it's got to put on your, I got to put on my big girl pants if I want to have the conversation with a person who is like the representation for me of what makes me uncomfortable, right? And then I just love that second quote, right?
Yeah, you can tell Introverts prepared this presentation because we picked this from her list of, things at the beginning of her book. Susan Cain and said, feel free to cross the street to avoid small talk. It's fine. And let me tell you, in Tahoe, that's quite the bold action because people are so friendly. So, all right, so let's get into the meat of it. I'm going to turn it over to Christina, and I'm going to listen like you all in this section, and she's going to get to it.
All righty, cool. I guess maybe you should set a timer for me because I'm
You're
going to
okay.
blow it. Okay.
You're all right.
So yes, it is good to see all your guys' faces. I wish I could see them all when I had the screen in front of me. You should
Because of the PowerPoint. I was giving you more room.
No, okay, that's cool. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start off with some definitions, but I wanted to give you kind of my opinion, or just everybody's got one, but something to think about point. And that is, we're in psychology moving into this period of like the person first language, right? And in these books, some of them were written recently, some of them not so recently. And the research started back in the 1920s, right? So it's been around for a while. And given that, what you're going to find is there's a couple of like terms being used here: introvert versus introversion, extrovert versus extroversion. For me, I find that introvert is like we are labeling the human, right? So I'm saying you are an introvert. And then when I think about the term like that, I sometimes view the the ways I'm describing the person is a little bit more negative, right? Whereas if I talk about what is introversion and when do I feel more introverted, the experience is a little bit different for me. Okay. And I feel the same way about extrovert versus extroversion. So that's just a thing to be thinking about in the background as we talk about these terms. So now, if you guys happen to have a little piece of paper next to you that you could pull out, we'll probably have you write on that and keep some notes to refer back to. If you do, that would be fabulous to pull out now. And what I would like you to do is think about the word introversion. Okay, what are 3 characteristics or traits of a person or of a person who is, you know, appearing introverted to that you might associate with that term, and then also with the term extroversion. Okay, and I'm gonna fear rushing everybody, but I'll give you a little, I'll look for eyeballs looking up at us. But when you are,
I'm gonna give you like a minute.
a minute.
I
Okay.
am not as nice as Christina. I'm like, no eyeballs, just 1 minute.
Okay, because I was thinking 30 seconds. So if you don't have paper, you could probably make these notes in your phone as well.
Lipstick on your mirror.
Do I have lipstick? No, I'm just kidding. Wait, some more people when it's, okay.
You can scroll down. All right, about 20 seconds.
All right, if that felt like a fast 20 seconds, it was. So why don't we do this? If I could have a few of you call out what were some characteristics you listed from the introverted list. We'll share 3 of those with the group, and then I'll ask for some from the extroverted list as well.
And if you don't want to call it out, put it in the chat,
Oh, that's a good idea.
which I have to then
I was
find.
going to say, but we can't see it, so then call it out. But okay. Okay, so what is something when you hear the word extroversion? What's something that? Oh, here we have some responses. Wonderful. Okay, so withdrawn, quiet, and shy.
Reflective.
Quiet, observant. Okay. Quiet, homebody, eye avoidant.
Oh, I
Good.
like that one, yeah.
Yeah, these are great. And we are going to spend much more time talking about, sorry, I'm now reading the notes, which is so awkward.
Here, I'll do this. You talk to them.
Okay, anyway, so you guys are bringing up important characteristics of a person with who is introverted, and we're going to spend more time talking about those. So likes to be alone to recharge, right? A couple people have noted that as well. Reserved and quiet. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, that is. You guys are, it's almost like you don't need this class. I mean, I didn't say that, but all right. Now, if I could ask for people to either go ahead and call out or type in the chat box again, that was handy, the associates to the word extroversion.
And I'm going to pull the chat up again and we'll start reading from there. Loud, social, eye contact, expressive, outgoing.
Enjoys crowds.
Enjoys crowds, good.
Okay.
Boisterous, I like that one.
Energized by the social interactions. Okay.
Yeah.
Outgoing, social, people person.
All right, good.
We're going to wait for one. Well, maybe.
Anybody have anything to add to that?
You guys
All
are
right,
very good. And
Yeah.
you guys seem to have a lot in common in your responses, which is also good because that shows that there is some sort of common understanding. And that's not just specific to you guys, right? This is research has shown over, since the 1920s that we do have a somewhat well-seated understanding of what the introvert and extrovert are. But there are exceptions, and I'm going to ask you about those. So right now, if I could get back over to the talk.
You should be there.
Okay, very good. Take a look at the list that you put together. You guys can do this kind of internally and think about, are the terms that you listed, are they positive or negative characterizations of the other? Okay, now I think of that as like, it's interesting when, if you're an introvert, to look at, did you maybe characterize the introvert in a little bit more negative light versus the introvert in a more positive, and or you may have found yourself doing the exact opposite, right? So take a look, and I am curious, because this is something that I think would be a meaningful experiment to conduct, if we tend to label others or ourselves more positively or negatively, and if, why, really. I mean, we're not going to answer that necessarily right now, but what do you guys can throw that in the chat, and or call out if you're seeing more positive or negative. For example, that word boisterous, I don't really think of it as a bad thing, but it does seem like if there's a continuum, which we are going to talk about, that it is a little bit more on that negative side. Like I have some, if I picture somebody being boisterous.
They're breaking something of mine.
Oh,
Boisterous children. Right? That's the first thing that comes to mind.
I'm definitely thinking like arms out loud. Yeah, I hadn't thought of the breaking. I don't know why clowns came to me, but
Kate, I think you made great observation that it's very cultural. Ashley shares that she has qualities of both and feels that there's one negative in each column, nice and balanced.
Okay.
And then, mine is from childhood. Lots of our opinions about this from childhood.
Totally.
Being either loud or withdrawn. I was constantly being sent to therapists as a child to make to see if they could make me more
turn
outgoing.
off the shy or something.
Yeah. To turn down the shy for sure.
Like turn it off, whatever. So we actually are gonna. You know what? I'll mention it now. So shy is something that Cain brings up in the book Quiet, and I thought it was really interesting because shy would have been one of my responses probably to the introvert category, and she noted that research has looked into this, that while shy people or behaviors tend to correlate with introversion, they're not the same thing. Okay, so they are two different things. And one of the ways that you can kind of conceptualize that is if you think about shyness, if anybody has ever felt it, I mean, I think we've all felt evaluated. Okay, we've all felt like we were being judged before, and that might produce more of this feeling of shy when you're trying to behave outwardly, and that's kind of a painful state. Okay. On the other hand, being an introvert isn't a painful state if the situation allows you to be that, right? So if you're a person who's introverted, then in that case, you just prefer to avoid the social activities, right? Or like we said, recharge when you're alone. All right. So I think that shy is an interesting one. And we did somebody had asked about where the texts are referenced, and they are now in the chat for you. All righty. Something to think about now is the negatives that were on your list. Okay. And I'm sure we all had some. Can you rewrite them as positives?
Like, since I'm the one that said boisterous and is breaking stuff, right?
Sure.
How could I rewrite boisterous in a more positive way? I mean, I think outgoing is maybe more neutral. Energetic, animated. That's a good one. I'll go with animated as my replacement for boisterous.
Really good. I have an example I'm kind of looking for right now, because of course I'm totally blanking. Basically, I was talking through this with a friend of mine, and she had defined the extrovert as, gosh, what was the term she used? A showboater. That's what it was.
That's
yeah, as showboating. And I was like, that definitely makes me not think positive things. Yeah. And then so I asked
if you
her,
say a performer,
yeah,
that's much more neutral than a showboater.
Right. So you have to, like, we want to think about the language that we're applying to, and this is actually what I'm spending a lot of my life working on in research now, the language that we apply to describe what's going on around us actually affects how we think, right? So if we think in the positives, then hey, maybe our life is a little bit better.
And I would say that for those of us that grew up with these labels from childhood, a lot of that is internalized as well. So don't just think about the language you're using to describe whatever your opposite is. Think about the language you're using to describe yourself and how to make that more positive and less judgmental of yourself, because we're often our own harshest critics.
Absolutely, absolutely. Agree.
Okay. There you go.
Ah, very good. So the enter key does work. So now on this next slide here, I mentioned that the research here started back in the 1920s. It started with Carl Jung, and he has developed over time, and then it has been extended many, many a time, the big 5 personality traits, okay? I've noted it here. It was our shorthand for it in psychology is OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. All right, and each one of those personality types is on a continuum where we kind of score somewhere along the continuum. Today, we're focusing on that E, okay? It is important to, you can see, right? I wonder, can you guys see the cursor when I point to it? Okay, thank you very much for the thumbs up. So right here, I've drawn a little continuum for you. You guys know what that is. And you guys may have scored, let's say on that survey, as an introvert, okay? You may have scored as an extrovert. You may be an ambivert, but kind of on the extrovert side or over here. One way of asking that question would just be like, can you mark on the line where you think you fall? Okay. And we're decent at pinpointing that, but I do think that the questions guide us. Okay. It is rare that you would be like 100% extrovert or introvert, but I do think what we happen to see is that somebody is more extroverted or introverted based on the situation, right? Like you take me to a Christmas party, I mean, you can go ahead and put me in the introvert category 100%. Like I don't want to talk to anybody, maybe not even the person I showed up with. Okay. I'm at the food table.
And if I was putting myself on this continuum, I'm like right, very close to the middle, just barely on the introvert side.
Okay.
Like I tend to cross over from introvert to ambivert and back
and forth. Okay. See, I would say that for me, it was weird because there was one survey that I took where actually it wasn't a survey, it was a set of traits, and I fit the introvert traits were on this side, the extrovert over here. I fit 4 out of 5 of them just perfect. I was like, those are me. And then the last one was just nothing like me whatsoever. And that made it very clear to me that you're never going to have a perfect match. And if you do, that's just because we weren't asking the right questions, right? There's more to ask. So think about where you are. And really what this slide goes into is the juxtapositions of what it looks like to be an introvert or an extrovert. I think it might be a little on the less than exciting side for me to read through that for you, but
you'll be able to have this PowerPoint later. We'll give it to Karen, and I think she's distributing it. So, if you don't frantically take all the notes on this chart, you'll be able to see it later.
Yeah, or you could screenshot it or take a picture. But I do want to bring up the fact that many of the things that you all mentioned actually are on this list, okay? So you mentioned that the introverts tend to get their energy from within, and so they recharge alone. And because of that, like all of these things kind of make logical sense. They prefer to work individually or in really small groups. They like to process and think through options. They're private with their personal matters, okay? So these things are, they do make sense intuitively. Then one of the things that is commonly used to describe the introvert is that they're highly sensitive to others. Okay, and I thought that one was really key because I feel like it's a thread that you see throughout all of their preferences and interactions in a positive way. All right, so we're thoughtful, deliberate, good at concentration, value the delayed gratification. Now, I do think that's important because when we are thinking about these personality types in terms of work, you ultimately do need to think about, how do I reward hard work, good work? And that if your employee is more on that introverted side, that it isn't something that you have to give them the immediate pat on the back for. Whereas if you look on the other side of the chart, the extrovert really is looking for that. Okay. So it's something to be thinking about.
And we're going to talk a lot more about some of these characteristics that cross over into the work environment in my section. So don't stress. That's coming.
If you're like, can you talk more about work, please? No, okay. So I think another interesting thing here is that people who are introverted tend to dislike conflict. Okay. And that is something to think about, because it is harder then for a person who is introverted to bring up a concern.
All of these things of like disliking conflict, needing time to think through their opinions, all of these will conspire to have your introverts participate less in a typical office setting, especially in a group discussion where you're trying to solicit opinions from the team. And so you really need to be careful about making space for your introverts to give you feedback to have the best possible use of their talents.
And
we'll get to that.
I would say that actually I'm an example of kind of blowing that one, because I asked everybody to like call out their responses, which would be right. But you had the chat, right? So like I said, everybody call out your responses, but that is only, that's a way of reaching half of the group. Whereas Shannon then remembered like, oh, we should use the chat. That gives everybody a voice, and it did. So I'm glad that exists. The next one here you can see, so I've mentioned the introvert preferring the solitary activities versus the extrovert, the social. I noted the name of the author because this work was published in 1984, and that right there, Emmons, he's the fellow that I took health psychology with at UC Davis.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So there's a lot of
Christina has some excellent professors.
I do. I've had some very cool professors over time. Speaking concretely, focusing on the facts, that's more on the introvert side. We talked about the shyness, and then I didn't go through the extrovert side, but it's pretty much the opposite, right? So you guys can take a closer look at that figure later on, but I am kind of curious. I know that we had places we were spot on because of what you sent in. Was there anywhere that you deviated from what seems to be the trend?
Where your idea of an introvert or extrovert is different from what's in the chart. And we have the chat box open, so you can chat it, or you can turn your mic off and speak it to us. Pretty much agreement I'm hearing.
Okay, all right. That works. And the enter button, I should just push it. Okay. Sure. Yeah, I guess we're not using it. Okay, so then as Shannon mentioned, we are asking to know where you guys came out with your surveys. I see some of you have already noted this in your name, which is perfect, and that's what we're looking for.
So if you don't know how to change your name on this, I am looking for that right now. If you hover over your picture, there's a little blue box with 3 dots in it. If you click on that, the third option down in the list is rename. So you can rename yourself first name -extrovert, first name -introvert, whatever you like. I know some of you, if you're at work, you might not be able to change that. That's okay. But if you can, go ahead and put your introvert, extrovert, ambivert status up there.
Yes, and that would be helpful for us so that we can kind of get an idea of
who's in the group.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Ashley, for changing yours. I see Denise has her introvert status up there.
We've got introvert, ambivert.
Kylie's an ambivert. Carrie's an introvert. We've got some. Kate, are you?
We have an extrovert.
We have an extrovert. Yay. Hey, Heather. Thanks for holding down the extrovert fort today. Kate, for some reason, I can't see yours, but I'm glad you guys are changing them so you can take a look at each other's as well.
Indeed, yeah. And I do think it's handy to kind of You know, if we all walked around with a sign, maybe that would ease some sort of communication troubles that we have at work, right? Like,
You know, it's very old school, but like I used to work in an office where we posted our Myers-Briggs
oh, really?
personality traits like on our desk, so that when someone was coming to talk to us and they were charging in like with a plan, you know, to yell at us about
You're
something,
like,
usually
whoa, okay.
they're like, oh, I need to check your personality type and make sure I'm coming at this the right way. And you know, it was pretty old school, but it kind of worked.
I mean, it's funny because like I could see that there's benefits and cost to that, right? I mean, like there is to everything. Benefits, great. Maybe somebody does force themselves to actually think or pause. On the other hand, it's a, again, cost of benefit. Like when we label people, right, there's some limitations that we also place on them with that label.
Sure.
So it's necessary sometimes. In psychology, we do it all the time. I say necessary, maybe that's not the right word, but it does offer us some convenience in terms of doing research. So it occurs. We'll go with that. Questions that I kind of pose toward you are like, how would a family member or a close friend, how would they rate you? And I do think that's interesting. Is that consistent or inconsistent with how you came out on the survey? Okay. Where do you get your energy? Do you get your energy being out with people, or do you get your energy by going home and, like the chart said, you know, sitting next to your hundreds of books, right? So, or just a dark place.
No kidding. My thesis advisor in graduate school, she was a brilliant woman, quite introverted. And she says that when she started teaching, it was so traumatic for her that the first year after every class, she would come home and zip herself into a sleeping bag for like 45 minutes to recharge before she could deal with anyone in her house, because of how intense it was to like move from that introvert to extrovert place and that performative role in the classroom.
Right.
Yeah. She said it got better over the years as she stretched herself into that role, but the first year of her first job was intense.
That does sound kind of terrifying, really. I mean, if I was in a situation where I had to do something like that,
serious recharging.
Yeah, that almost sounds like a battery pack. Finally, I'll just mention this because I had before. I do believe, and it is likely that you can see situations in which your status as either introvert or extrovert would vary based on the situation, right? So maybe when you're out with your friends and you're going out for a night on the town, you really are pretty extroverted. But when you're in that office meeting that Shannon was talking about, you know, you would identify it more as introvert. Okay.
And I have a tendency to be the opposite. I use all my extrovert energy up at work, running meetings, interacting with people, doing that. And then when I go out with my friends at night, I just want to be quiet and let them wash over me.
Yeah, that does make sense. Anybody have comments on that?
Does anyone want to comment on any of these boxes of, we've talked about the survey, but how a family friend would identify you, how you recharge, or whether you're introverted and extroversion is situational. And again, you can either talk to us or chat it.
Oh yeah, you guys are commenting with how you recharge at, let's say, it sounds like home. Maybe you could actually do this at work, but using weighted blankets, noise canceling headphones, that does seem like a adaptation for work. Maybe turning the lights off in your space for a short period. Close the door, right? Like if you are lucky enough to have a door in this day and age, close it every now and again.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It keeps people out.
Those of you that have worked with me in the leadership forum before know I have a 5-year-old son with autism, and the noise canceling headphones are seriously a lifesaver for him in situations where there's a ton of stimulation. He's like one of the highly sensitive children, highly reactive children to the extreme, and being able to control the sensation that he's taking in is so important. So I think that introverts in some way share that.
I think that's interesting because I do think I'm more on the extrovert side, but the noise is the place where I'm much more introverted because, so I have 3 children. I'm going to show you a picture of them eventually. And this morning when I'm like, trying to put like get dressed for the first time and look like I care about myself. Put on makeup and things like that. Today's the day she woke up at 5 a.m. with me. And she was just talking the whole time. Talk. And I was like, I just need quiet. Right? Like I'm trying to think through what I want to say. And it is. So I hear that.
We've got some great comments here. Someone is talking about being on, like they're able to be extroverted when they're around others, but it's really exhausting. And that is absolutely true for me. Like I would much rather, spend an afternoon looking at statistical reports and analyzing them than 45 minutes at a cocktail party. It's much more exhausting for me. So I totally understand that statement.
Yeah, I do too.
Lots of people saying they're perceived as extroverts, but need a lot of downtime. I totally resonate with that. I think most people that I work with would say I'm an extrovert.
I like this point here about despising small talk. That's one of the things that's in that chart, and that is that the introverts tend to prefer depth over breadth, whereas the extrovert tends to prefer breadth over depth, right? So
yeah,
you want to know a lot of people a little bit, or a couple of people in a meaningful way. And that is, I think it is something to think about. When I think about my my personal situation there with where I energize, I definitely like to be around people, but people I know, right? When I'm in a situation where maybe it's the same number of people and it's people I don't know,
harder.
Yeah. Enter. Not enter anymore because I clicked.
There we go. Show that. What is it now?
I think if we click here, then enter.
Oh, okay.
Alrighty. So now what we would like to do is ask you to kind of go into your workspace. Okay. And now you know what you are.
In your head. Just in your head.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You don't have to go back to work. So you know that if you're an introvert or extrovert or ambivert. So think about somebody at your place of work who is your personality opposite on this dimension and who you would like to work more harmoniously with.
And if you don't have a work example, pick an example from your personal life. Totally fine with us.
And then, I mean, I could put like pictures of people's faces up there, but that somehow seems inappropriate.
Let me do it for you.
That's right. You know who they are. Anyway, so what I think is go ahead and write down the name of that person if you have a place that you're keeping notes, because then what you have is a note for later to look back that, hey, you know what, with really, I mean, I can't give you 5 minutes to think about this right now. Following my gut, that person's name showed up on the paper, right? And I do think it's important to think about workplace relations, right? Like it makes sense to get along. You're all going to be more productive if you do it. And sure, if we all just thought that and did it, it would be so much easier, but we can't because we are people with these personalities working in situations, right? So we're going to take you through a series of kind of thought exercises, and they're going to refer back to that person.
So just keep that person's name in mind. We're going to refer back to it as we go.
Right. And I think we've talked enough about the kind of characteristics of what your, opposite would look like, but maybe list a couple of characteristics or traits of that person that you noted and how they're your opposite, right? And we'll give you, say,
yeah, we can do a minute here.
30 seconds. Okay, a minute to do that.
So your opposite and 2 or 3 characteristics where they're specifically opposite from you. Oh, wow.
Ooh. So we're looking at the chat.
We're looking at the chat. We're catching up with you guys. Okay, that's true. If you guys are direct messaging me, I'll get back to you a little bit later.
Not having enough spoons. Yeah, I had to buy more.
That's a great phrase, not having enough spoons.
Yeah.
A year of work from home makes it super difficult to answer. How much do I feel that in my heart? I feel like a year of working from home has really amped up my introversion quotient
Yeah, totally.
pretty substantially. So
Yeah, I was trying to explain to my husband the other day. He was like, hey, maybe you could go out and pick up some dinner. I was like, well, are you going to call in the order and pay for it before I get there so that I can just grab it?
Yeah.
And he was like, no, I mean, can't you just go in? I'm like, people don't go in places anymore.
It's going to be a hard transition.
Yeah.
Okay, so I hope you have your person and a few traits. We're going to keep going.
moving
Oh, I
on.
need to click now, huh?
Yeah, I think you just need to click all the way down, then hit enter. Okay. Hit enter. There we go.
Okay, good.
Very good. Now.
All right, so I'm going to switch over and I'm going to talk a little bit about the myth of extroversion and a little bit more about the workplace. And I'm watching my time here so that we can stay on track. So I want you to think for a second about a hire that happened within an organization that you worked for, where charisma and extroversion were really, really important in the ultimate decision to hire the candidate. So like, I'll give you a few seconds, get that person in your mind. And then the questions that I want you to go on with after you have that charismatic hire in your mind is, was charisma and extroversion really an important part of fulfilling the job? And then did the hiring process favor extroverted candidates for that job? And whether there was any sort of accommodation made to allow introverted candidates to highlight their best selves.
Mm-hmm.
And I've given some examples of what those might be. And then finally, I want you to think, if you know, about whether that candidate was successful once they assumed the job duties. So just take a few seconds. You all get your person in your mind. I've got someone in my mind.
I have someone in mind too. I like the thought point about how do you set up an interview to be, just as well, to not be selecting against an introverted person. And because I think interviews now are, right?
Yeah. So does anybody have a little story they want to tell? I think this one might be easier if you just unmute and tell a little bit of a story. If anyone has one to share. You can talk about hiring processes and whether they really favor the extroverted. You can talk about the person that was hired because of those characteristics. You can pick basically any aspect of what I'm focusing on.
I'll jump in.
Carrie,
with a
great,
story.
thank you.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I was in the unique position where I was able to be part of the hiring process for my own boss. And that was interesting. But anyway, we interviewed a bunch of people and ended up hiring someone who I would consider definitely a strong extrovert. And she has ended up being great. She's very different from me. But there's really not much else to the story, but
so Carrie, when you went through this process of hiring, how was the process? Was it really designed in a way that made extroverts show better?
No, not necessarily. I think it was fair to everybody. I think we had a broad variety of questions
Awesome.
to give all types of people the opportunity.
It's good that your organization is doing that, because I think most of our organizations still interview in that gotcha way, meaning you come into the room, you don't know what the questions are, you face a panel of people, they ask you questions, you have no time to prep, you just have to start talking. And that's a very sort of, that's an extrovert paradise, but not necessarily the best environment for introverts. And so thinking about those things is one of the things we want to do when we talk about whether our organizations are introvert friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda, you want to tell a story? Thanks, Carrie. I appreciate that. You're on mute. I'm going to unmute you.
Yep, there I am. Sorry. Thanks, Carrie. And I work for the Recreation and Park District here in Truckee. And by nature, most people in Parks and Recreation are extroverts. It's kind of like you were saying earlier, that you just have to kind of be out there and be social. And And it absolutely affects our hiring decisions. Like if you don't have that type of personality, we wonder if you're going to be able to thrive in a position where you kind of have to have that small talk walking through the recreation center, walking through town and being able to be like, hi, hi, hi. So it's a tough call. I'm sure introverts would do fine and they'd find good coping skills to work with it, but we absolutely tend to lean towards extroverts.
I think that there are certain jobs where having those extroversion skills really helps you be successful. But I think that we assume that's more jobs than it's actually true for. I think that, there are jobs where we can make adaptations that would allow an introvert to be successful. And I'll give an example from my personal professional life, which is that I was the interim president of my organization for a year. We had
that was a nice year.
We had an unexpected leadership change, and I stepped in, and I really do hate cocktail parties. And cocktail parties were one of the staple kinds of events that we had in our fundraising department. So when I stepped in for a year, I sat down with the fundraising department. And I said, I'll do a few of these, but I'm not going to spend my whole year doing cocktail parties to try to raise money because I won't raise you any money that way. I'm not as good at that as other people. So what I had them do is break those cocktail parties down into dinners of 6 to 8 people where I could be more effective in connecting and talking to those folks. And that allowed me to be effective at fundraising by making those human connections in a different format. So did I have to talk to people? Absolutely. You cannot fundraise without connecting with people. But could I find a way to do it in a way that really supported my best self as an introvert? We did, and we were effective. And I think that they were really great about making that accommodation. And I think that we could think of accommodations like that in a bunch of different jobs.
I agree. And I think actually it's part of what, looking ahead in this session, we're going to be asking you to do in your own space. Right?
Any other stories before I go on?
Hey, this is Brenda. I'd like to mention one thing. Sorry, I'm still in my pajamas, so I'm not going to go on video.
Okay. We don't judge.
I've done a lot of nonprofit and disaster relief, particularly where some of those groups even started out as volunteer. And the introvert extrovert thing becomes really tricky in those situations. Because the people that are going to rush into a disaster volunteer situation are risk takers. And developing those projects into long-term scenarios gets really hard with those risk takers because they're daring, they're loud, they're brave, they're bold, but creating a really good team around that and honoring the people that maybe don't want to get on a plane and go to a disaster area, but are willing to give you the time and do your bookkeeping and all of those things to really create a good team has been really important. And talking about this with you guys is even just bringing it up more. So that's more of a big picture statement, but I think that's an important part of building a team, I guess, and honoring everyone's skills.
I think that's absolutely true. And one of the things that I want to make sure I highlight is that introverts and extroverts both have something to bring to the table in terms of benefits and supporting each other. Extroverts will bring to the table that risk-taking quality, that ability to make decisions quickly, that ability to grab opportunities as soon as they come up. What an introvert then brings to the table is a more deliberate attitude towards evaluation of the risk, a more considered and slow attitude in terms of looking at all the facts before making a decision. And when you put them together, you'll get the best, most balanced decisions. And so I think it is especially tricky in disaster relief where you're talking about a situation that has personal risk. And I think one of the points that Kahnweiler brings up is if you find different ways for people to participate, and you specifically mention the skills that you need, as opposed to just a general call for participation, introverts are more likely to recognize themselves in the call if you speak to those specific qualities. Like, we need someone to look at data. We need someone to make detailed plans for disaster relief. That's the kind of thing introverts are amazing at, but you have to call out their specific qualities to get them involved. Otherwise, they won't see themselves in your request for help. So,
and this may be like biting off on something that you were going to say, but it's kind of a theme in the readings for today and a lot of the other literature related to this. And that's that if you do take the benefits of each, right, the benefits of that the extrovert can bring to the table and the introvert, then 1 + 1 = more than 2, right?
Yeah.
So then you really can drive the productivity of your organization, the success thereof, to greater places.
I love the comment that's out there from Megan that says that you're using a platform for text-based networking.
I like the speed dating thing.
I think that's brilliant. And the speed dating thing is also really interesting but I want to mention something about text-based communication. This is one of the alternate communication strategies that introverts often really love. When you talk about what kinds of communications introverts will gravitate to, we're talking about text, we're talking about email, we're talking about the messaging part of social media, ways that you can communicate in a text-based format where you can control when you send the message and exactly what the message says.
Right, you allow
Right.
yourself the chance to edit. I'm horrible. I've learned over the course of time. I'm horrible at thinking before I speak, right?
So the message has given me this freedom that I can just type it all out, and then I've actually vented in large part, right? And then I can go back and edit it and make it appropriate and professional.
Extroverts will favor face-to-face, video conferencing, and sort of anything where it's live face-to-face interaction.
Feels like.
And so when you're talking about in a work environment where you actually support both your introverts and your extroverts, it needs to be a mix of those communication styles, of the face-to-face, the phone, the voice conversations, the chat, the text, the email. And extroverts can sometimes help introverts understand, this was an emergency, you should have called me even though you really didn't want to. And introverts can help extroverts understand, that wasn't an emergency, you didn't need to call me during dinner to tell me that. And that's one of the ways in which they can really help each other.
Right. And one also, so I totally agree with those points. And it is about making your organization sensitive about the speed dating for internal networking within your organization. I really like that as opposed to the cocktail hour as well, because you know what it does? It takes away one of our main insecurities as a human, right? Like, what do you have to do at the Christmas party? You basically have to cold call someone. Right?
Yeah.
You have to walk up to people and start a conversation out of nowhere.
And you don't know if they want to talk to you, right? So in the scenario that I think Megan was the person who put that up there. It's fine. It's fine. I think it is. You don't have to worry about that. You're talking to this person for 8 minutes.
Because they pop up on your screen.
Right?
And so you might as well make it a good conversation if you're doing it anyway, right?
Taking the choice out of it actually helps in that scenario. Okay, so down here and then click.
Here, I'll do that.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the office environment.
Is that in your way?
No, it's
Okay.
So we really have adopted across all industries and groups this idea that collaboration is always best, right? That teams are always best. And I am not saying that teams are not important and that collaboration is not important. I think it is really important. However, I do think that we need to acknowledge that groups do not always produce the best results. We need a balance here between allowing people to work in groups where they can exchange ideas and bounce those ideas off each other and get inspiration from someone that's very different from them, and an ability to work alone and to have some solitude and creativity. So why do groups not always produce the best results? Well, here's some things. Sometimes people in groups become really passive. You show up to the room, there's 10 people in the room and 3 of them really want to talk. It's easy for you to sit back and say nothing. In this environment, people can also lose sight of their own opinions. It's much easier to adopt the opinions of others in a group setting, especially if, like our introverts, you don't love conflict. And then finally, it triggers the part of our brain in a group that's afraid of rejection, to know that you have to speak up and challenge something that people are saying. So sometimes people really avoid conflict in groups and yield to peer pressure because of all those sort of like really foundational fears about rejection, about conflict. So we need to make sure that we're building work environments where we have opportunities for group work, but also we encourage creativity, through offering privacy and freedom from interruption. And this is often quite antithetical to the new open office spaces that we've built. We've really gotten good at providing open space for collaboration. What we've lost is the cubicles around the edges that we need for people to retreat to when they need to do quiet work. And that may not be good for ultimately creativity, innovation, and productivity. Does anyone here work in an open office? You guys are having such an interesting conversation about video conferencing on the side. I really just want to break up my phone and talk to you.
I know I'm trying to.
But you're talking about how tiring it is to be on camera all day. And you're having a little side conversation about eye contact. I think that's a fascinating one. I actually have an employee that I had a very successful working relationship with for many years. And at the end of our relationship, when we were very comfortable with each other, it's been like a decade, she told me that the reason that she was more successful with me than her other bosses is because when she would come into my office, I didn't force her to make eye contact with me. I would let her come in and share and show me her screen and look at the wall and, do whatever she wanted to do to be comfortable. And instead of worrying the whole time about me forcing her to make eye contact, she was able to share her ideas.
I think that's really interesting. And I'd like to kind of
go ahead.
Hop on that. With regard to the computer, okay, so this is somewhere I struggled in teaching with Zoom. I find myself, and I'm doing it right now with you guys, making eye contact with your thumbnail, right?
And, as opposed to with our camera.
Right. And so my students would tell me, like, you're never looking at us. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm constantly looking at you, right? And then I realized it is that I'm not looking at the camera. So it feels unnatural. Like right now I'm staring right at the camera. It feels unnatural because I can't see like your faces. I'm not seeing really the slide. I can't look at the chat. And it's funny because it almost does give us this like permission to not have to make eye contact, right?
Which is not necessarily a bad thing.
I do think there's, again, there's balance. Yes, there's a balance there. I do like making eye contact. I think I understand a person a little bit better when I can see them, right? So, anyway, just wanted to throw that in there.
So did anyone want to share that they work in an open office space? And if so, how do you balance that need for private work with that open space? Kate?
During not COVID, we're in like individual large rooms with multiple people in them. So kind of.
Do you have like cubicles in them so that you can go into a cubby and?
Nope.
Oh wow. Okay.
No.
So you're constantly in the fishbowl all day.
Yeah. But
how does that work?
Noise canceling headphones.
She's like, I already put that in the car.
I don't know. I've noticed that sometimes when some people have had more privacy, that they're not as productive because they're shopping for skis on it. They're online or something like that. And I'll like walk into their office and it'll be like shutting down windows. and so I think that like having the transparency is good. And for me, I just needed like my office mates in my immediate vicinity. When I first started at the office, were two women. One's Brazilian, the other one's just chatty. And immediately was like, all right, day one, need headphones. Like that was needed right away. And then when we went into shutdown, it was 3 women and then one really introverted guy, and that poor guy like sat there with his hoodie on and headphones in and just like
hard
I
environment.
think really I think it was very difficult for him, and it's an architecture engineering office, and so like
there
overall,
are some introverts there.
There's a lot of introverts because even the architects who you think of like the client facing and the marketing and all those people, like the majority of our day is and career is spent reading code and staring at a computer and quiet contemplation. So like we're actually mostly introverts in the office, and then like a lot of us get forced into extroverted situations because somebody's got to do it.
Absolutely. And this is a good reminder that extroverts connect by talking and sharing information, with
Ooh, I think you're frozen a little bit, Shannon.
Are you okay now? Oh, I'm gone.
Your video's still frozen.
Whoops. Oh, my video's dead.
Wait, what the heck? You,
No.
We can hear you though.
oh, you can hear us. Okay, well, we're trying to
We can
get
hear
it
you
back.
and we can see your cursor moving, but your video is just stuck.
What the heck? Okay, I went to go try to look at the chat, and then when I did that, I killed our video, but it still says our video is going. Oh crap.
Can you guys still hear us?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you, Shannon.
So I'm going to finish my slides, and then we were going to take a 5-minute bio break anyway, and then I'll get the camera fixed during the bio break and
Very
come
good.
back to
Okay,
you.
very good.
So let's go
Sorry.
ahead and go to the next one, which I can't. There we go. Okay.
All right.
So we've talked a little bit about open office spaces, and we talked about how important it is to find a balance in our workspace, one that supports both introverts and extroverts. And I think that that's really a key thing to remember. And then we also need to think about work assignments. We need work assignments that not only value teamwork, but also solitary effort. We know that meetings are important, but we need breaks from meetings. Have you ever said to yourself at the end of the day, I didn't get anything done today because I was in meetings all day? Well, of course, like meetings are getting something done. And yet we need that time to actually dig in, work on a project, and get something done. And then I wanted to come around to this point before we end this section and say we need to find ways in our offices to encourage casual conversation, which feeds our extroverts, and at the same time, allow people to disappear into private spaces when they want to get work done. And there's a great story from Steve Wozniak of Apple, of course, where he talks about the fact that he was the very introverted, solitary sort of technical engineer, and his office filled with a bunch of technical people and coders wanted to find a way to get those engineers and technical folks to interact with each other. So what they had was a coffee and donuts moment every afternoon where coffee and donuts arrived at the office. People would come out of their cubicles and chat over the coffee and donuts. It gave them an opportunity to interact. And then just as quickly as it came, people could disappear back into their cubicles and get work done after it was over. And that idea of cafe culture is something that Google has used and other companies have used to allow introverts and extroverts to get kind of as much stimulation and contact as they want, to have informal brainstorming and conversation. I love Beer Friday, Kate. And then to go back to work in a way that was appropriate for them. So just some things to think about when we're in the office, trying to figure out how we can support both our introverts and our extroverts in that space. And I love that my boss always reminds me that work is in the meetings. Work is in the meetings, but not only in the meetings, especially if you have really detailed work that you need to concentrate on, you've got to have some of that solitary time. And I hope my loud person is not really feeling too bad. The person next to you will still get their work done, and you can always give them some noise canceling headphones for Christmas.
That's funny. I do think it's interesting the way you talked about the person who is extrovert or introverted actually creating a physical boundary, you know. Anyway, I feel bad about the video right now. So.
Okay, so I'm gonna end you on this quote from Susan Cain. Solitude is the catalyst for innovation. And I think for introverts, this is especially true sometimes, that we do need time by ourselves to think about things, to really just think. When there's nothing else on our schedule and we're sitting quietly with our thoughts, and we can get things done. So if we want progress, we have to give ourselves time to think.
Right, and you shouldn't have to always do that outside of the 9 to 5.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to take a 5-minute bio break. We're going to fix the camera, hopefully. If not, this is going to be like my little introvert paradise for the next hour, because I'm going to get to talk to you without having to think about whether my eyebrows are even. And we will be back at 10:15 to finish up the workshop, okay? And I am actually going to log all the way out to try to fix my camera,
Yeah, I
so
think
don't
you
worry
did
if I
this.
disappear.